So today's proceedings are to hear from Danelle and Naz and Ronald, who were participating in the Inspire workshop in Hamilton, and I've asked them just to give us a quick summary of what they actually did in the way of research, but also to tell us something about the process they experienced in the Inspire workshop itself. So I think, Danelle, you're kicking off the discussion. Would you like
Thanks, Len.
you
I'm going to
introduce?
try and share some slides.
Yeah, and tell folks who you are and what you're on about in general before you get into the Inspire piece.
So my name's Danelle. I'm a PhD student at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. My PhD is in applied behavioural economics, looking at how people make decisions in home care package resource allocation. So it is that kind of philosophy or idea that dragged me to the door of interRAI and has plunged me into this brave new world. So I was fortunate enough to be offered a position at the Inspire 2024 meeting, which was held pretty much bang on a month ago. We started at the beautiful McMaster campus in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So a long way for my Australian colleagues and I to travel, and jet lag was definitely a real thing, but we managed pretty well okay. So the location really was idyllic. It's an absolutely phenomenal sprawling campus with a mixture of old and new buildings, plenty of things to see and do. So the program ran for officially 10 days, but 5 days of it was an intense kind of immersion in all things interRAI. So we would all meet in the lecture hall at 8 o'clock, where we would share a breakfast, followed by an overview of the activities of the day by our wonderful hosts, Dr. Andrew Costa and Luke Turcott. We'd have a little bit of a discussion about where we were up to. This is the day one plan. So this was more how interRAI worked and how the week was going to work, and where interRAI was headed. Then we would have a little bit of morning tea before we heard from our colleagues, the people that we were going through the program with. So a few people every day. Then we would have lunch. We certainly could not complain at any point during the week that we were hungry. So the World Food Fair was a little bit of fun as well, where everybody was to bring an item from their country. So we had, I'll talk a little bit about it in a slide or two, but there were over 14 countries represented. So we had a lot of fun exploring, exciting our taste buds. And then that particular day, we were given access to our data sets. So we had the afternoon then to work on them, but each day we also had to give a presentation, an update presentation to the mentors. So that often took a big chunk out of the afternoon and a chunk of your preparation time. So once that wrapped up, we had a very quick turnaround time, pretty much time to get back to the dorms and then out to dinner. And they had dinners for us every single night. Was also not uncommon to run into some native wildlife. So the little fellow there was somebody I ran into on the way to the lecture hall on day 2. So we also had a deer and a resident raccoon that nearly moved to Italy with one of the other participants. The cohort, there were 24 of us from 14 different countries, as I mentioned. And we worked across all sorts of interRAI settings. So the ones that were represented in this particular cohort were the 3 home care, mental health, and the long-term care facilities. So from that, there were, of the 24 candidates, 24 very distinct geographical, pedagogical, professional, and cultural academic backgrounds. So we were all very, very different and had never met each other before. Even those of us in Australia didn't really know each other or our connections to interRAI. So those 24 were divided into 5 groups, and that was set in our specific setting. We were given 5 days to run the analysis as well as the weekend. So the brief, we had an excursion to the beautiful idyllic Niagara Falls on the day before the big interRAI presentation, and I felt that journey under the falls was very analogous to the brief that we were given. So in the beginning, seems really easy. We're just going for a nice, idyllic stroll down the river. Then by midweek, you're kind of getting very wet and you're in free fall and plunged into this crazy world of big data. And then by the end of it, you're well and truly drenched and being pummeled by many, many tons of water to come out the other side, a fresh new researcher. So I was fortunate enough to be in Home Care Group 3, and we had people from all around the world. So Brittany was our Canadian representative. She's a young interRAI PhD student at the University of Waterloo, but her PhD research is looking at caregiver distress in developing nations. So she's done a lot of work in Uganda. Then myself, we also had Mauricio from Costa Rica and Nan from Hong Kong. So Nan was a data analyst that ran a lot of our regression models for us, and Mauricio is now a professor at the University of Costa Rica, doing a lot of work all over the world. So the project that we decided to look at, given our areas of interest and the home care data that we had, was to look at caregiver distress. And our question changed a little bit over the course of the week, just given the time constraints that we had, and also the unfortunate managed to crash the interRAI server and lose 3 days of coding. So we had to do a bit of a scramble. So there was some work done by John Hurdes in 2002 to 2006 that looked at caregiver distress, and we decided to compare our 2014 to 2018 data set to see if these things had changed. And so why we cared about informal caregivers, we recognise that they play a critical role in the delivery of healthcare services. So informal caregivers are friends, family, spouses that provide unpaid or voluntary care for people, which reduces the burden on the healthcare system. So we basically don't need to pay for these services. It's a cost that's often overlooked. Having informal caregivers does reduce hospitalizations and can decrease the chance of having to transfer to residential aged care. There are several indicators in the interRAI system of caregiver distress, but the one that we chose to compare to, because it was most comparable with the data that we had, is the item where the person is, the carer is unable to continue. So the care relationship is dissolving and not sustainable. So it's important for us to understand, to support the role of informal caregivers and to support them to continue providing care, to have that sustainable relationship. We need to make sure that we understand the risk factors of caregiver distress as well as what the care recipient needs. So what we were looking at then is, are the risk factors for home care client caregiver distress consistent over time? So it was a replication of a prior analysis using the 2018 to 2023 Ontario Home Care Assessment data. And the analysis that we ran was a bivariate cross-sectional analysis, because that was comparable to the 2006 study. There were a lot of variables that we looked at. So from the assessment, we could pull information about gender, marital status, living alone or loneliness, any ADL decline and any behaviour changes, cognitive decline, communication difficulties, incontinence, falls, acute services, and trade-offs, which they have what they call their poverty indicator. There were also a bunch of scales that we could use. So CHESS, which is a measure of health instability. We created binary variables of these. Maple level, which is very similar, tracks very closely to our priority levels for home care packages, although Maple has 5 and we have 4. Any comorbidities that the person has, IADLs, the cognition scale, the ADL hierarchy, and the depression rating. So we had both ADLs and IADLs there. And so, of course, our Y variable was caregiver distress. And so we looked at the indicator variable that identified any informal helpers unable to continue in caring activities and use that as a binary variable, yes, no. So the 2006 sample had about 600,000 and so did ours. So 593,305 episodes that we were able to look at. And what we noticed with the incidence of caregiver distress in Ontario, it's increasing. It has been increasing year on year. So in our sample, it went from 20% to 24%. And in the 2006 cohort, it was down around 12%. So in that intervening time, it's nearly doubled. So what this is saying is that caregivers are experiencing increasing levels of distress, and we're not really doing enough to address the problem. When we compare the models, the unadjusted odds ratios, that bivariate analysis, we can see that they're pretty much identical. So things that were protective are still protective, things that were likely to increase caregiver distress continue to increase caregiver distress. So what can we actually say about this? On the results themselves, not very much. It's a bivariate analysis and it hasn't really changed. But what has changed is those rates of caregiver distress. So the fact that they're doubling should be a red flag to all of us that we need to do something about this. And we can use this situation to raise awareness of the issue. So to give you an example or an idea of why this is important and how this could cost an awful lot if we continue to ignore the problem. In 2023, across all of Canada, in every single program, there were 5.7 billion hours of care provided by informal carers. If we consider just the minimum wage to replace this, there's a $94 billion saving, or $95 billion saving to the Canadian health system. So if the carer relationship is not sustainable at that rate of 24%, we're looking at needing to find $24 billion to replace just tomorrow because those carers can't continue. If we filter that down to just Ontario and just the home care assessments, home care cohort, there were 95,000 assessments in that 2018 to 2023 data set, with an average rate of 24% unable to continue, 23% unable to continue. So that means that there is an average 21,000 people on an annual basis that are transferring to formal care, which increases the cost just to Ontario by $14 million. That is just replacing the lost labour. So we haven't even started to consider the costs of avoidable hospitalizations, transfer to long-term care facility prematurely, or any lost productivity costs when these carers are not able to continue in the labour force. So a very costly problem that is kind of flying under the radar at the moment. So for our group, what we would like to do is conduct a multivariate analysis, although we did find that when we started to do this, we do have a collinearity problem with a lot of the scales. There's a lot of overlap. So as a group, we're working through that. We also would like to publish the comparison paper. When we run that multivariate analysis, what that will allow us to do is to identify high-value targets, which can help us to use the assessment and targeted interventions to help improve sustainability of care arrangements in conjunction with providing the high-quality home care services to recipients. For me, and interRAI, I need to finish my PhD, but at the same time, working very hard alongside my supervisors to conduct the cost benefit of interRAI in Australia. And from my time at Inspire, I'm also very interested in discussing the opportunity cost to Australia if we don't implement a system like interRAI. And then obviously from the Inspire experience, I'd like to pay it forward. So this experience for me has been relentless, exhausting, but one of the best experiences of my life to date, and highly recommend to any early career researchers as an experience that accelerates your understanding of being able to work in real time with real information. So that's it.
Thank you, Danelle. That was fantastic. Murray's applauding, and I'm sure others would too. Thanks, Naz. Introduce yourself, and away you go.
Okay, so we'll share my my slides. Just to introduce myself, I'll do that. My name is Nasir Wabe. I'm a senior research fellow at the Australian Institute of Health Innovation. I lead the aged care evaluation and research stream within the institute, and I work closely with Professor Joanna Westbrook. And we have a lot of collaboration with Len, I think 3 projects, large projects. Yeah, so we'll share my slides now. Thank you so much. First of all, I would really like to thank Len for giving me this opportunity to go to Canada to participate in this program. So he nominated me for this, and I really appreciate this. And I completely agree with Danelle that this is one of the best experience I had in academic experience I had in my life in many aspects. So it was rewarding. It was amazing. So just to share my experience and also the project I was involved in while I was there, just briefly, I think we've got only 10 minutes, right, Len? So overall the program structure was great. It was packed, but a lot of very interesting things. It's not just about learning new stuff. It's about social events and a lot of other things. So it was amazing. The mentors was excellent, very experienced mentors. And the presentation they did was also very, very great, and great teamwork as well. And there will be a great future collaborative opportunities as well. For me specifically, I signed up for 2 groups with an AI in intra and pharmacoepidemiology working group. So I joined those 2 working groups, and I will continue interacting with intra moving forwards. Like I said, excellent mentors, most of them from North America, and one person from Hong Kong, and I think she's moving to Waterloo in Canada very soon as well, and another person from New Zealand, but the rest are from North America. Yes, their presentation was amazing. I think on the first day we had a presentation from Brian Fraser, I think one of the founders of interRAI, Len. It was amazing presentation and very relevant to what we're doing here as well. And our teamwork, so people from all over the world, and we work very hard in the afternoon, sorry, on our projects, and it was an amazing experience as well. Social events, like Danelle mentioned, it was amazing. Plenty of food, plenty of drinks, plenty of coffee. I love coffee, so it was amazing. And for the first time, I played a pickleball, even though I had injuries at the end, but it was amazing. So this is John Herdis. He's the Canada interRAI director, I think. So he's a big pickleball fan. So he took us there to, I think it's in Cambridge, Danelle. It's near Waterloo. So you can see Ronald having fun there as well, and it was great. And then the visit to Niagara Falls was one of the greatest experience I ever had again. So I enjoyed our trip there. Friendship, a lot of people, like 24 participants from 14 countries. So we made a lot of friends as well. Now let's talk about the project I was involved in. So we looked at predictors of change in sleep disturbances in Canadian long-term facilities. So we're a group of 5 people. Lisa was from Belgium. Alcina, originally from Portugal, but we're now working in Switzerland. Eduardo from Italy, and myself from Canada, from Australia, and Jae-yoon from South Korea. So the topic we chose is sleep disturbance. We all know that it is a very vital process for physical and mental health, but unfortunately, it's very common in nursing homes. Some previous studies showed 20% of nursing home residents experience these sleep disturbances, and it has it's associated with cardiovascular disease and a range of other conditions as well. So we looked at to describe the prevalence of sleep disturbance among long-term care facilities in Canada, and identify predictors of change in sleep disturbance. So the second bit is kind of novel. The first one is already out there in literature, but we thought, what are the predictors of change in sleep disturbance over time? So we've done some longitudinal data analysis to look at that. So design-wise, it was we looked at this longitudinal retrospective cohort study, and we used data from 2016 to 2022 from 2 provinces, New Brunswick and Saskatchewan. A total of 228 nursing homes were included. Time 1 assessment, and then there's that 2 time points at baseline and after 3 months. So for the second objective, we looked at change from time 1 to time 2, if there's any worsening or improving in sleep disturbances over time, and then looked at the predictors of time. So our total sample was 21,000 people. So for our outcome measure, which is sleep disturbance, we used this item in interRAI. So we defined sleep disturbance as if the item was scored as 1, 2, 3, or 4 in this question. And we looked at a range of potential independent variables, demographics, disease conditions, symptoms and functions, and prescriptions as well. So we have data on polypharmacy, and psychotic use, and hypnotic sedative use at baseline and at 3 months as well. So for data analysis, for the main analysis, we used GEE, and also accounting for cluster effects at the facility level. So we fit 2 models. Model 1 was worsening sleep disturbance. That was if there was no sleep disturbance at baseline, but there are some sleep disturbance at 3 months. So we defined that as a worsening sleep disturbance, and improved sleep disturbance when there was sleep disturbance at baseline, but no sleep disturbance at 3 months. Just briefly at some baseline characteristics. 2/3 female, mean age was 84, 26% were newly admitted, 60% had dementia, Parkinson's disease nearly 6%, and depression 23%, stroke 20%, and CHF, congestive heart failure, 14%. So this is the answer to the first objective, the prevalence. So the prevalence was 21.7%, which was within the existing literature on the prevalence of sleep disturbance in nursing homes. If you remember the systematic review I showed you in the introduction, it was 20%, so it's roughly within that. And we also compared the 2 provinces and looked at over time. New Brunswick slightly had higher prevalence of sleep disturbance compared to Saskatchewan, but it was roughly within 20 to 25% over time as well. Okay, so change in sleep disturbance. So these are people who had no sleep issues at baseline, but worsened. So there are 10% of people worsened over time. And people who had sleep issues at baseline then improved. They are nearly 52% improved over time, which is a great thing. So we fit the model. I don't want to go into the detail of this, but the key variables in here we found was being a male, newly admitted resident, or having pain, moderate cognitive impairment, or daytime sleeping. Again, having conditions like COPD and CHD, coronary heart disease, or treatment with antipsychotic medication or hypnotics, they're all associated with worsening of sleep disturbances. And our other model was the improvement of sleep disturbances. Some of the variables, it was very surprising that some of the variables were in both models. For example, if you look at newly admitted residents, they are a predictor of poor sleep outcome as well as improved sleep outcomes. And John, one of our mentors there, was saying that during the first few months of entry into residential aged care, people would have a range of issues, and some of them may have good sleep, some of them may have bad sleep, and their nature is very fluctuating, he said. So it could be because of that. But surprisingly, we also saw polypharmacy to be associated with improved sleep disturbance. We don't know, but maybe we'll explore that in further detail, why polypharmacy is associated with improved sleep outcomes. Maybe they were taking a lot of medications that can put people to sleep or cause drowsiness or something. We don't know yet. But another important variable that we found was daytime sleeping, and that was also associated with improved sleep disturbance in this model. We also looked at variation across facilities. As you can see here, there is a significant variation across facilities in sleep outcomes. We have funnel plots there, and there is another graph there to show how they vary across facilities. Surprisingly, it varies from 0 to 63 or 64.5% across facilities. It's a huge variation. So in general, we saw high prevalence of sleep disturbance. There's a huge discrepancy across facilities, different predictors, and one key important factor was antipsychotic use, which was associated with worsening sleep disturbance. And there are some discussion points here, but we will expand on this, and we will be writing this up as a paper, and we already started the process to do that. Okay, so that's all from me. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. But this slide will summarize our experience there. As you can see there, I jumped so high. So that shows that how I was so excited about this program overall. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Naz. You guys are reminding me why I've joined interRAI and stuck with it. It's a great pleasure and very stimulating. Yes, Ronald, would you like to close out for us?
So I'll just quickly introduce myself, and then I'll talk about my personal experiences within the program. So some of you maybe have heard me talk in this forum before, but for those who haven't, my name is Ronald Dendere. I'm a research fellow here at the University of Queensland Centre for Health Services Research, and I do aged care informatics research. And my introduction to interRAI assessments was about 4 or 5 years ago as part of a large project that is funded by the Digital Health CRC. where we were using the interRAI LTCF as a data set for collecting data across different aged care providers. Like I said, I'll start with my discussion of the project that we did, that my group did at interRAI Summer Program for International Research, where we decided to explore the control over decision to enter long-term care. And as part of that work, eventually we went on to develop a predictive model for people with no control over their decision to enter a home. So this is just a brief description of the people in my group. So we had representations from Canada, the US, Poland, Australia, that is myself, as well as New Zealand. So the background for the study that we decided to undertake is that older people have the right to have control over their health decisions. And this should include the decision to move into any long-term care or residential care. This right also includes those with cognitive impairment or dementia. But however, we see that despite people having these rights, some older people are intentionally or unintentionally excluded from the decision-making process. So we wanted to explore the characteristics of those who have no control over this decision. And this is probably something that belongs in the results, but our data initially showed that those with no control to enter a home were more likely to experience anger, depression, and loneliness. So these were the key motivators for us to explore this particular issue. And so the research question that we formulated and we wanted to address is, what are the characteristics of those residents who have little or no control over their decision to move into long-term care in Canada? We aimed to develop a predictive model to characterize those at risk of having little or no control over that decision. So in terms of the methods, just briefly in terms of the data that we used the same data that Nas described in his earlier discussion. But for our study, we conducted a cross-sectional study for the period of July 2016 to March 2022. And we used the interRAI LTCF data again from New Brunswick and Saskatchewan provinces in Canada. And for our particular study, we only looked or considered only the first assessment for each resident upon admission into long-term care. This is just a brief summary of the item of interest for our study in the LTCF assessment form, which describes the level of control a person had over the decision to move into long-term care. The responses to this item range from complete control, and it also includes those who could not respond. Once we started looking at analyzing the data, we had access to roughly 30,000 assessments from the 2 Canadian provinces. And after excluding non-admission assessments, residents younger than 65 years, and those whose assessments were done while in hospital, our final sample was roughly around 16,000 residents across the 2 provinces. Our data showed that about 54% of residents had little or no control over the decision to enter into a home. And in that data set, we also saw that about 8% could not respond. So the data also showed that there was little difference in demographic characteristics for our cohort, except that we saw a higher percentage of those that were widowed among residents with some control, as well as a higher percentage of those that were married or partnered among those who could not respond. Now, in the next couple of slides, I'm going to be showing you the characteristics of those that had control in their decision to enter a home. And in these charts, just keep in mind that the red that you're seeing represents negative status, and the green represents positive status. So starting with the cognitive performance scale, or the CPS, we see that the group in the could not respond cohort had a high proportion of people with the most severe cognitive impairment. And this sort of gives you an idea of some of the people within that group. On the ABS, or the aggressive behavior scale, we see that a small proportion of those with complete control showed the most severe level of aggressive behavior, but it was much higher among those with little or no control over that decision. Whereas on the RAIS, or the social engagement scale, residents in the little or no control group and those who in the could not respond groups had higher proportions of social engagement. And finally, we see that the communication scale also showed a similar pattern. Initially for this project, our goal was to produce a descriptive study describing the characteristics. But at the encouragement of John Herdis, who was one of the interRAI mentors, we decided to go further and develop a predictive model, which we decided to call the control over decision scale. And for that, we conducted a decision tree analysis to identify groups of residents based on their characteristics to understand, in order for us to understand the prevalence of those with little or no control over the decision to enter a home. And for this particular analysis, we removed those who could not respond, as our focus was only for those with full or some control compared to those with little or no control. So what you see here at the bottom of the slide are 5 groups according to our analysis. And in this scale, we see that there is increasing prevalence of little to no control going from left to right, or from green to red. Again, those colors representing negative and positive status respectively. So we saw that the strongest predictor of little to no control over that decision to enter a home was the CPS. And I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to describe each group, but yeah, happy to answer any questions if there are any. So I'll just skip those slides. So once we've completed that work, as is so often asked within the interRAI community, the so what and then what? Well, for us, we saw that the most recent literature describing this particular topic was published about 8 years ago. And most of those studies were only using small samples as well as unvalidated surveys. So we see an opportunity for us to add to this particular field of research. And our first step as we do that particular work is we are going to expand our work to continue validating our model, and then also perform longitudinal analysis to explore how that particular control over that decision might influence further outcomes down the road. So that's the future of our work. And then I think to describe my personal and overall experience, probably the best way to start is to give you a brief description of what my colleagues said here when they suggested that I apply to the Inspire program, and also encouraged me to apply for that particular program. They described it as an incredible opportunity that will help one to grow as a contributor to the interRAI community. And they did scare me a little bit by describing the program as really intense, with long, exhausting days that are characterized by working long nights sometimes. But they were also quick to point out that it's an incredible opportunity that you're likely to enjoy and come up with really, really meaningful collaborations. And having gone through the process myself, I can confirm everything that they had said. And like I said, I had been working with interRAI assessments for about 4 or 5 years before I went there. And I had a really good solid foundation of how interRAI assessments work. But there were 3 very important lessons that I learned for the first time at Inspire. particularly the intricacies of how the systems are developed and how decisions are made as to what item goes into each system for each particular setting. So, and the first lesson that I learned was there are 3 levels to contribute to the interRAI community. At the top of that level is being an interRAI fellow. The second lesson that I learned is that there are personal benefits, both at a personal level as well as at a professional level in being part of the interRAI community, particularly the ability to have and sustain international collaborations, friendships, as well as access to diverse expertise. And finally, I also learned what it takes to be a successful contributor to the community and what is expected for one as a member of the community. And I really loved how John presented these particular points with very, very good examples on stories, for example, exemplifying collegiality, application of effort, as well as persistence and resilience and support for others. And in the process of conducting the project that I've just described, I also began to see those benefits in real time. So that was really, really, really good. For me, again, interRAI Inspire was an opportunity to tick off Canada on my bucket list. And I experienced new things with pickleball being my favorite, thanks to John Herdis. And it also gave me an opportunity to form, and I believe this is the same for others as well, to form both personal and professional connections, which I'm pretty sure is going to last me for the rest of my professional career. I thought I should just conclude with this particular screenshot of a message in our group, which I think beautifully captures our experiences as well as the sentiments overall for the program amongst the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronald. I'm glad you all went. You hope that people who are exposed to interRAI have the same joyful experience that I've had for 20 plus years. So it doesn't stop, although you get a bit immunised against the kind of novelty after a while. You get so used to having a big collection of international friends that you forget that others don't have that, and it's a tremendous privilege. And also so many smart people that do different kind of things that you can kind of call on without any fear of inconveniencing them or being intimidated by them because you don't know something they know. Also, understanding policy directions in different countries. It's just a privilege to be part of such a community. There should be more of this kind of thing in the research community. It's very hard, however, to establish this sort of collaborative. It's a credit to some of the founders that started this off. And yeah, so it's a real privilege. So I'm just so glad you enjoyed it. So glad you're excited. Hopefully you'll keep pushing the interRAI barrow and contributing and participating in the work we do. And I think we've got a next generation of activity happening here with the possibility of some implementations and new people committing to the interRAI cause here in Australia. So it's exciting times for us. Did anyone want to comment or ask questions of any of our colleagues? Yes, Jason, you wanted to say something, and then Murray. Yeah.
Yes, look, thank you both. I sort of reiterate what Ronald said in terms of interRAI Aspire is an amazing opportunity. And I've been involved in the one that was here, thanks to Len back in 2019 or 2020. Ronald, specifically for you, one, speaking to the age question there, and looking at those differences, it'd be interesting to get a sense of age in population to see whether or not Saskatchewan has a different profile in the community, just to see whether or not that's playing out in the two, in the pattern that you showed. And the second one that sort of struck me, I really love the decision tree activity that you're encouraged to do. So but I noticed the two brown ones that you had in the middle, which are pathed from two different perspectives, but the profiles of the groupings looked very similar. And I'm wondering whether or not, for ease of decision tree activities, whether or not they're worthy of just compressing to a single group. So you see with CPS equals 1, 2, and it splits off the less than communication of less than 2, then communication 3. Those two browns, your odds ratios are very similar. The distribution of your control, no control is very similar. And so I'm wondering if these are somewhat still the same. There's a profile that sits behind them that is actually the same.
That's a really, really good question. In fact, we have been advised to look at that communication, that difference in communication a little bit closer than we have at the moment. So yeah, that's part of the validation work that we are doing. So yeah.
Murray, you have the last say.
Oh, great. Thanks, Len. This one's for Naz. Thinking about sleep disturbances or quality of sleep, from my personal experience, that's quite a subjective thing. It's certainly changed over the years as I've gone from a young person to an older person with children. And so I'm wondering, with is there a background knowledge of that question in interRAI you could share with us in terms of like inter-rater reliability or between assessment reliability? Because you ask some people about the quality of their sleep and they'll say it was pretty good, and another person has exactly the same experience might say, oh, my sleep was terrible. Could that be related to some of the kind of the things you're seeing as covariates?
Yeah, I mean, that is really very good question, Murray. So I actually asked the same question to John when he told us about, so my question to him was, this is just one question in the interRAI asking about sleep disturbance, and whether it was enough to use just one item to kind of determine whether a person has a sleep disturbance or not. He said it was okay to use a single item, but obviously there is a limitation with that, like you were saying. It's not a validated tool or something for like specifically to assess sleep disturbance. Yeah, I don't really have a clear answer to your question, but we will describe that in the discussion when we write the paper. And I'm not aware of any tool out there that quantifies sleep disturbance. I don't know if any of you has seen that before. But yeah, so it's just one item in the interRAI saying that, and yeah, we don't know much about it.
Yeah, thanks, Naz. I don't suppose it would have been raised as a potential question for you guys unless, the more, the interRAI, people with the interRAI long-term experience would have thought it was worth doing. They wouldn't have picked it out of the hat. So
yeah, they said it would be sufficient to use that item.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a tool by itself. It's just a question within the assessment. Yeah.
So I think interRAI items in these schedules don't survive unless they've got reasonable interRAter reliability, like good.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, in spite of, you could imagine there's a lot of noise about what people say about their sleep and so forth. Or I think this is an observer question anyway. It in part takes into account what the person says, but also the assessor would be making that judgment. However, when you look at the results, you see some interesting trends and differentiate, which sort of validate the item itself. If it was just noise, you wouldn't think of any association. So, and there's quite a few interRAI items like that. When you look at them, their face validity is a bit, trying to capture these concepts with just one or two questions, which is all you have available when you run these schedules, unless you want massive burden. So it does look like it performs as an item. It probably isn't perfect, but the alternative would be probably a 20-item schedule that has to be done every 3 months, and nobody would do it. So that's the compromise you have to make. Yeah. We're out of time. Thank you for the three of you for turning up in Canada and coming back with such positive experiences, and I can see you're going to keep working with your colleagues, and as many people do, and I think there's a lot of those collaborations that started in the Inspire world that are still continuing. So quite a lot of the people that have been to forums have graduated into a lifetime of interRAI. They've become fellows, and so you never know. But just thank you, and I know everyone here thought they were great presentations. We'll talk soon.
For those of you listening to this conversation who may have further interests in interRAI systems, please visit our website, interRAI-au.org.